Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Philosophy on the Internet podcast. I am your host, Anthony David Vernon, and on this episode of the mini series, going over various internet platforms and the philosophies occurring on them, we will be covering philosophy on 4chan. And this episode will take the form of an interview with one Harry Halpin, who mainly has his foot in the world of computer science, but as you'll see from our discussion, is very aware of the world of philosophy. And most of the discussion is Harry speaking, and Harry gives, I think, what can only be described as a lot of well understood insights on 4chan. He really knows his stuff when it comes to the space that is 4chan. And so I hope you all enjoy this discussion between myself and Harry. Before the episode starts, I just want to let you all know that there were various issues with the audio, and I hope that I fixed them up to such a degree that it doesn't inhibit y'all's enjoyment of the episode. But with that being said, let's get started, and I hope you all enjoy this episode.
I've just been looking at 4chan off and on for a number of years. I think it first came by my radar, maybe, I don't even know, the famous Habu Hotel phenomenon. That's what first kind of, I guess, people heard about, including myself. And then I saw some protests, and of course, the rise of them. And this is more than a decade ago. What I think people don't remember is that 4chan was an anonymous, where the anonymous comes from 4chan, and it was the only, I would say, political movement that was kind of in solidarity, even paying attention to Arab Spring, particularly in Tunisia when it first kicked off in 2011. And I've remained friends with all of people. I've had some IRL, I guess, encounters with folks from 4chan. And I think it's an absolutely fascinating phenomenon, a fascinating internet place, so to speak, that is not easily boxed into to its classical image now as a kind of white nationalist internet dark haven that kind of gave birth to Trump due to memetics. I think that theory is pretty absurd. There are much more, and obviously, there is a lot of white nationalism on 4chan. It'd be crazy not to say that. But I think 4chan just reflects our current culture and our current sense of possibilities. And it's not simply something that can be put into a kind of right versus left wing box. It's actually going, I think, beyond those categories. And it's not particularly articulate all the time because it is, to be honest, full of angry young people. And that's because our society has failed the young. So the young have found each other over the internet and in 4chan and other places, 8chan, so forth and so on. And I'm getting a bit elderly, I would say, but I do remember being a teenager on the internet. When I on the internet, the internet barely existed. It was mostly bulletin board systems, dial-ups. You had crazy things that were kind of pre-internet, like SprintNet and Telenet. But it was the exact same kind of conversation. It was mostly young men, frustrated young men without much of a social outlet, communicating over things that interested us, which did include, Hitler, and did include because there's an attraction to anything that your teachers or society as a whole tells you not to talk about. And there's also this and I actually found those bulletin boards, but there was also serious discussions over politics, philosophy, just video games, a lot of video games.
Well, let's
So
hone
yeah,
in on
so
some of those bulletin boards just as a quick little side tangent. Because the main one, because you talked about how 4chan now has this image of being, a very derisive white nationalist site. Do you think there's a particular reason why sort of the essence of slash poll has kind of taken over the site as opposed to the music boards and the lit boards and some of the other boards? Do you think there's any reason like that has become sort of the main image of 4chan? 4chan as this far right nationalist thing. Do you think that's because that board has infected the rest of the site, or do you think it's kind of like outside media coming in and painting 4chan through, slash poll?
I mean, most reporters can like barely use the internet, so it's not surprising that they don't understand 4chan. I mean, that's I think the attraction of places like 4chan. It's a place that your parents don't want you to go, that society doesn't want you to go. You can discuss things that are off limits. Things you couldn't even discuss in school. You get in trouble if someone heard you espousing these viewpoints, and it's an experimental place. I think people have forgotten that, like I was saying, when I got on the internet in the late '90s, was experimental. They were enjoying themselves. They're exploring who they are. They're understanding their identity. You didn't have this kind of neo-fascism of Instagram where you have to project a spectacular image of who you are and how rich you are and how much fun you're having and how successful you are with some chick or some dude or whatever. That didn't exist. So I think it was on some level much more authentic and much more raw, and that's the fundamental attraction, is that 4chan lets people, due to its reply, due to the anonymous posting, lets people play with their identity, lets people explore. And I think that's an incredibly valuable aspect of existence, which is being increasingly eliminated. And in terms of the different boards, there's many different boards on 4chan. When I got interested in 4chan, what is the B board was the most by far. Everything interesting was going on there because it was funny, it was crazy. All the good memes were there, so forth and so on. I think in terms of like more serious philosophical discussions, you can have. I mean, it's not the most popular board, but there are occasionally nuanced conversations about philosophy, reading list, so forth and so on. In lit, the literature board, and then there is, of course, Mew, which is very popular, right? The music board and video games and all of that stuff fits in there. And I think the politics board got larger afterwards. I forget when it really came into take over the popular narrative. But all these boards have their own character. They're all fucked up in different ways. That being said, I think there's an interesting historical trajectory where 4chan started effectively to discuss really intense anime and manga and all this, which I don't really personally pay too much attention to anymore. All these kind of crazy video games sort of that's kind of the genesis. But then as people started to socialize with each other, they realized that they could organize. Now, you wouldn't consider traditional political organizing going into Habu Hotel, which was a popular children's game. Yeah, hilariously, I have a friend who encountered 4chan because she was a 12-year-old who was playing Habu Hotel, or 8-year-old or whatever. And this invaded her existence. Now she's really into
no.
Now she's really into 4chan. She's like 20 something now. But effectively, like, that is a form of organization. Now, it's the kind of organization that would be done by 12 to 15-year-olds, or people kind of angry and kind of want
or just edgy,
provoke people. Edgy,
yeah, edge lord. There's an edginess too, yeah. And I guess just going back to edgelord comments. Oh, do you want to finish something first?
Let me finish. So that organization happened, and that really came out of like the B boards, basically. And then Anonymous happened, which I've written this whole article on. Be called "The Philosophy of Anonymous: Ontological Politics Without Identity." We can go to that later. And that was viewed at the time. I mean, Anonymous was kind of viewed as a kind of secret hacking force that honestly had even large governments terrified of them, and was quite crucial in things like Occupy Wall Street and Arab Spring, and of course LulzSec and Anti-Sec. And I have friends who are part of some of these things. I'm still in touch with Mustafa, T-Flow, and they all got Fed jacketed. And but a lot of these people are explicitly, I would say, kind of anarchists, explicitly left-wing. You would always consider them. I think Jerry Hammond would consider himself to be anti-FA, really. When push comes to shove, he was by far probably the most skilled hacker of that group. But then I think there was a reaction against Anonymous, which kind of spun out of 4chan, but really much became its own thing across many different countries, particularly still active in the Spanish speaking world. And because Anonymous is perhaps viewed as taking itself too seriously, there was a kind of reaction against it to become more edgy and more fun. And then that itself has, it's sort of a dialectical relationship, has morphed into like the dominance of the pull board in terms of really, what you would consider the manosphere or white nationals, whatever. But a lot of it really is, I mean, honestly, like it's a lot of it is it's kids. It's not like full of Nazis per se. I mean, it'd be kind of funny if it was, but it's not. It's mostly people trying to have fun. And one way you can have fun is you can pull someone's leg, you can offend someone. And it's a competition to be the most offensive, the most extreme, to provoke more and more laughter, lulls, to provoke more and more, make people angry, particularly normies, is quite funny. And I think what's happened is there's been a reaction against what you would consider the more progressive, let's say, forces of Anonymous. Now, the domination of Kekistan and whatnot has really taken over, and I'm sure it will just swing the other way eventually. If Trump just becomes mainstream and, kind of various forms of white nationalist politics become mainstream, then they're no longer funny. They're no longer forbidden. White nationalism might just end up being the ideology of Trump. Right, as Althusser said, this is like imaginary relationship to the world, and this now becomes like an official state-sponsored ideology. Then, of course, it's no longer interesting to 4chan. It's no longer interesting to young people. Like if your teachers are telling you to endorse Trump, then of course the rebellious spirit of 4chan will just go the other direction. And so I think it's not like it really simplifies what's going on 4chan to say it's either it doesn't fit into this kind of left versus right wing box. It's really a generational phenomenon, and it really is kind of like the collective unconscious of the internet kind of letting itself go, and it's really about lulls and fun, and I think that's a good thing. So yeah,
so you're saying it's more of a mode of being, more of a mode of acting than actual permanent fixed ideology, because as someone who's spent time on the music board, there isn't really a set ideology on the music boards. The music boards seem to be just very much like serious to goofy discussion. It's just every type of discussion on music. And it seems as a kind of result of that, at least to me, that board's a lot like richer as a result, where other boards like Poll do seem kind of baseless, because it does seem like that sort of competition of getting a leg up, getting a leg up, getting a leg up. And you also made this statement earlier about people playing with their identity. And I think that kind of marries quite well together, at least from what I see on 4chan. It's like people trying to like test out their identity, figure out their identity, and this simultaneous sort of like, oh, I'm going to be more offensive, I'm going to pull more legs, I'm going to get at people more and more. And it almost makes 4chan, seem to have a coherent ideology of like offensiveness, get at. But you're pointing to 4chan almost being very postmodern, almost this sort of like there is no grand narrative. There are just, these micro narratives that are competing with each other. And, you brought on the Hegelian dialectic thing, that right now the current synthesis is towards, Kekistani, Trumpian, white nationalisty things. But as soon as, that synthesis becomes a societal thesis, 4chan will be there to present a new antithesis to that. Is there any reason, I guess, you have confidence in that, as opposed to this being the new permanent ideology of 4chan?
No, not really. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I have, so to go back to the edginess of 4chan.
Yes.
So again, I think it's important because maybe everyone watching, hearing the podcast knows what is 4chan. So it's a bunch of image boards, and you post images on these boards with some text. So it's like a reply, and you can post new images and new replies. And the ones that are popular kind of float to the top, and the ones that are unpopular go down, and essentially kind of gamifies the whole offensiveness or the whole discussion. So good discussions and very extreme content goes to the top. Things which are particularly funny or edgy go to the top typically. Things which aren't go down. So what's really interesting is the effect that this structure has on the conversation. But what's really different about 4chan, what I think is very precious, I want to go back to that identity, is that the identity is now the primary method of repression and selection under late capitalism. So I cannot really be myself. I know it sounds stupid, but it's true. Because if I say something which is offensive, which let's say contradicts woke ideology, I will get canceled. Or if I, say something or do something which is considered outside certain bounds, everyone will know. Right. So historically, there's a really wonderful Wendell Berry essay on this somewhere. But historically, you had social structures that mediated the development of identity. And to some extent, there were social structures. I mean, they might not have been good; they might have been repressive and terrible. But there were community structures that mediate this behavior. They would say, "Okay, look, this is wrong. This is right. You've been accused of this. And there were structures that kind of gave people a form of life that they should uphold. I mean, the MAGA one is, the you should have a family, have a job, have wife and kids, and be proud of your house or proud of your country or whatever. And so you've always had, before the kind of internet driven late capitalism period, you had much more cohesive social structures. And it's absolutely true that these social structures have dissolved. And then what people have to replace those structures is they essentially have a kind of shadow world, a fake world, a simulacra, let's say, simulacrum of the real world on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. And it's mostly not anonymous. They're increasingly trying to tie your identity. They're trying to tie this to these kind of digital identity wallets. And so that I want to get a job, and all of a sudden, something I said on Twitter from 10 years ago could come up, and I could lose that job. Or like I'm on Facebook or Instagram, I have a fight with my significant other. Maybe she breaks up with me. Maybe, the whole world knows. Maybe I feel like a loser. I don't have a job. I don't have a career. And this is public now. Right. So, and so everyone has to create this like pretend version of reality, which then essentially becomes fascist. It starts controlling their behavior. You're no longer, when you go to a vacation, let's say you go to, I don't know, I've never been, but you go to Bali. I'm trying to think. I've seen this phenomenon in Greece. I've seen this phenomenon in Greece. You go on vacation and no one is enjoying the beach. Everyone is having, their boyfriend is walking around
taking the pictures,
taking
and
a picture. Yeah, taking pictures.
They're using it almost, I like to refer to this, at least with hikers, as like a natural completionism, where it's like they have all the stickers on their Subaru, they're doing like the check marks on like the all trails. Like they just want to collect localities as opposed to embrace them.
Exactly. And it's all an act. And it's all, to be honest, it's what you would call, from Guy Debord, it's a spectacle. It's the image of the commodity. Your life has become a commodity to be consumed, to be judged, and to be selected by the market. And everyone's going to fail, right? So no one, no matter how high you go, there's always going to be someone richer than you, someone brighter looking, someone with a hotter girlfriend or whatever. And this is a terrible environment for young people. This is really destructive to human development as a whole. So it is not surprising, given the collapse of existing social institutions, the family, the state, the corporate ladder, the career, whatever, it's all gone. And then if you go outside of the United States or Europe, and you also see this collapse happening in different ways with religion and whatnot. And you have, at the same time you have that collapse, you have this imposition of an inauthentic, spectacular existence, which is being forced on you by Das Man, by the system, by everyone else. So you, of course, will react negatively to this. You will say, well, screw you. I am myself. I am, but you don't want to be yourself. You don't want to be anybody. You just want to express yourself. You want to have fun. You want to laugh. There's no future for you in this dying system. you know that you can never truly succeed in the spectacle. So you create an alternative gathering place, which is really what 4chan is, for people just to chat, to talk, to socialize. And that's a communal space. And I think that's actually, and of course, like everyone is like young. So of course people will say offensive things. People will have crazy conspiracy theories. This is an accurate reflection of humanity, particularly at that age. And it's, but that's fine. That space has been denied to them outside the internet. And the internet itself has become increasingly corporate and fascist. So of course people are going to try to find something. And then what comes out of 4chan is, you know, fucked up. It's offensive. It's dangerous. But that's its
Yeah,
attraction. And I
for
think
sure.
and now what's interesting is that, but I think what's really interesting is how that has been politicized. And I think that there is a political force inside 4chan that's still underappreciated. Now it's become a bit conspiratorial. People blaming Trump on 4chan, people blaming I don't know what on 4chan. But at the same point, I still feel the underlying phenomenon. If I had to choose between, you know, 4chan and Facebook or Instagram, I go 4chan all the way. If you had to choose between Forbes magazine or whatever, or LinkedIn and the Biz board on 4chan, you choose the Biz board. It's more fun. The information is fucked up, but maybe better. And it's authentic community, and people want authentic community, even if it's mediated and effectively anonymous. I think, and being
Yeah.
anonymous is the most interesting part of 4chan.
For sure. And I guess I do certainly want to touch on that in using a couple terms. You pointed to simulacra, and, there does seem, to be a benefit to anonymity that it would perpetuate authenticity. But you also mentioned Heideggerian Das Man, like the man, the group, And there seems to be this interesting thing happening with 4chan, at least from an outside perspective, that despite this anonymity, despite this freedom, despite this ability to just be yourself as much as possible, there still does seem to be this forming Das Man and the sort of like central attitude and doctrine to 4chan, because it seems to attract a certain type of user and have its dogma. It seems that there's something interesting, despite there being no real consequences on 4chan. There's still this tendency to go with like the larger sort of group, to go with the sort of wave as is. There just seems to be something interesting here simultaneously, that yes, these elements do exist. Like, there of course are people disagreeing, and you're pointing to anonymous as sort of a left wing movement out of 4chan is very true. And but it seems to be less and less. There seems to be more and more of a central dogma in 4chan, sort of circles. Like, oh, we like, I forget the album that the airplane over the sea comes from, but there seems to be like a lot of Fantano worship on the music boards. There seems like in the politics section to be, again, the political stuff we're talking about, in sort of the lit boards. There's a lot of dissing of, if philosophy does come up, no one likes Karl Marx. So there does seem to be these sorts of tendencies forming. Do you think there's a particular reason for that? Is it because that our current society is liberal in this way, and so the boards are going to rebel as a result, and then attract a certain type of person? Or do you think it's sort of like everyone comes with genuineness, and then they just feel ostracized by the conversations on the boards?
Yeah, so I mean, well, I want to go into how 4chan works with. So again, when you respond, it's effectively anonymous. So that means that your future behavior is not linked to your present posting, and your present posting behavior is not linked to your previous posting. It's unlinkable. That's how you define being anonymous. There's no singular identity behind it. Now, what that means is that there's no social rules or restraint. And but that doesn't mean that there's not a collective kind of society forming on these boards with its own unique, let's say, subcultural reference points and rules. I mean, that's exactly what happens. I mean, the crazy thing about 4chan is it is the kind of it's the originating point of a lot of what people take for granted as mimetic internet culture comes from 4chan, precisely because it does develop these bizarre subcultures, and then they spread outside of 4chan and take over the internet, or in the case of Trump, the real world. I mean, the famous quote is someone said, "Oh, we just elected a meme as president," and that is kind of true with the case of Trump. And so I think there is a kind of formation, and it's not because people are being authentically themselves, because when you're, the concept, I think it might be useful to back up to the concept of the authentic individual. Let's say this Nietzschean concept, or the heroic Achilles from Bronze Age pervert or whatever that everyone's really
into. Just every character in an Ayn Rand novel.
Yeah, John Galt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So this existence no longer is realistic for the vast majority of humanity today. So humans cannot, quote unquote, be real. Our culture has been subsumed by capitalism and its more bizarre financialized forms. Again, the social structures, as I mentioned earlier, are effectively gone. So I think it's very romantic to say, okay, people go to 4chan and they're being their authentic self. I think what's actually happening is you're seeing what my former philosophy professor Bernard Stiegler pointed out, using a term I think from Deleuze, individuation. That people are if I wanted to become an individual, I want to become the Ubermensch, for example. I want to have this authentic Dasein. It's not like you just have it. You have to go through a quest. You have to go through a process. That's you're individuated. You become an individual over time through what Simondot says associated milieu, through technology, right, the internet, through other people, through social relations, and that builds you into who you are. Now, if those forces are non-existent or blocked, the technology does not encourage individuation. It encourages what Stiegler called disindividuation, and you form isolated, fragmented, what he calls individuals. Then it's just chaos. It's not that there's authentic being. There's actually no being. There's at best the fragments of being there, and they kind of make a collectivity, let's say, on these forums, but they never metastasize into this authentic existence. I think that people want. Instead, you have the fantasy, the fantasy of you could be rich like Trump, or you could be powerful like Trump, or you could I don't know, who knows.
Yeah.
And that becomes very attractive. And I think what's happened is that due to the failures of so people in this screwed up collectivity, this negative existence, this negative collectivity, they recognize that the current world is a desert, and that there's nothing of value there. And of course, because the system is rigged against them. And so that's why if you look at Anonymous per se, it's not really like a left-wing anarchist movement. It was really an anti-corruption. Thus the vast importance of WikiLeaks. And the Operation Avenge Assange by Anonymous was very interesting. Where they and this, it became a what I would call an anti-systemic movement, but without a coherent politics. And then what's happened is because there was no actual fundamental social change from the 2011 through, let's say, 12 or 13. I mean, it's still kind of in the end game now in Syria. There was no fundamental change in society. That it's taken another form. It's taken maybe a reactionary form, but it's still essentially like the reason why people are excited by Trump is because he's funny and he's anti-system. And the same thing with a lot of, I forget, these kind of manosphere characters.
Like the Andrew Tates of the world.
The Andrew Tates, yeah. Sorry, I can't remember. He would say something ridiculous. He would just say so many absurd things. Like Trump would say, like I was just in the United States, and the big discussion in the news, right? Not just 4chan, but in the news, is should America invade Greenland? Should we take Greenland over? This is something which could only exist almost as a meme. It doesn't make sense really. So what's happened is that because the fundamental social issues of how to become an individual and how to have a fulfilling existence, these are denied to people, that a new form of political nihilism has taken over, which is anti-systemic. And I think it comes out both in progressive forms such as Anonymous, where they, which are fundamentally international, and it also comes in reactionary nationalist forms. But it's the same underlying nihilism because people are not allowed to form real social collectives, and so what they have is you have these kind of these internet collectivities which are ultimately negative. But I think that's okay. Actually, what I would argue, because I'll very again say that's a big. I would rather have the beginning of my existence on a board like 4chan, where I can be open and perverse and deranged and say reactionary stuff, than a totally administered society of control, which we're sort of seeing with the rest of the social media platforms. So I would say, well, it's a beginning. Now, the problem is it's never really developed beyond that. 4chan is still, you go there, it looks like it did in 2000, I don't know, 8,
Yeah,
man. It's
a
about
pretty
the same.
unchanging site. Like,
Yeah.
and one of the things that's, I guess, kind of interesting about it in that regard is that you do have the option to add yourself like a little, even like bored temporary username if you wanted like do something fun like that just for kicks. But it doesn't stick. It doesn't maintain. It almost has this system of being like unarchived and deleted. Like there are 4chan archives, but they're very rare. It's very rare that something gets archived. So it's just this flood of messages, images, words, text that are just meant to just be like thrown out and thrown away. Seems to be the fundamental mechanic on that site.
And that's why I want to go back, because what I think is happening on 4chan is philosophically very interesting. And in my paper, I kind of point this out, which is that I think there's a lot of misinterpretation of Heidegger. And Heidegger was a fascist and had many, say, dubious parts of his philosophy. But nonetheless, he does make this interesting point. I think it's a mistake to kind of equalize existence with individual being, right? I think you can have existence without individual being. So when I have individual being, let's say I'm Harry and I have a body and a mind and everything's, I can almost feel my mind inside my head, and I have a particular narrative and life structure, a particular phenomenology. That's really been an obsession with philosophy. But what Heidegger says, which I think is correct, he said, let's go back to the originary point. Let's go to the origin. Let's go beyond the ontic, this world as it presents itself, to the ontological, the structure of being. And how he kind of ends being in time, at least Division 1, the rest never really got properly written down. It all gets really crazy, the later works. But it's interesting nonetheless, is he says, well, there's these fundamental, what's translated as moods. I don't think mood is the right translation. In German, the word is Stimmung, which is like something you always when you're tuning a violin, it has a stimma. And this is I think the best word, the closest you have to this is almost like a feeling of ambience and a voice, but that's not necessarily embodied, and that's not necessarily from a particular person. It's almost like an atmosphere. And I think that is where historically religions come from. Religions were associated with places. You had the spirit of a mountain, the spirit of a river, the spirit of the storms, and these became associated and mythologized and anthropomized as individuals, just as we're doing now with ChatGPT and our machines. And I think that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing in 4chan, you saw the first glimpses of this kind of pre-individual phenomenon, which is not necessarily destined to be an individual, to be gathering and having a voice and having a sort of almost creativity, a stimmung, a mood. And then what's happened, which is completely crazy, even I'm shocked it happened, is that this kind of total nihilism, this fuck the world and burn it down, for lack of a better word, vibe that you're getting from 4chan, this stimmung, this voice, which pre-exists, is more fundamental to being than your individuality. This is now spread from 4chan throughout all of society. And I think that's fascinating. And that shows that these fundamental ontological structures or truths are not just, they're not something that's in our past. I think it's in our present, and they're incarnated differently due to the differences now we have in technology, as opposed to, like, I don't know, the ancient Greeks or the ancient Germans or the ancient Persians. But it's still there, and I'm not convinced it's all bad. I think that I would much rather have this genuine creativity, if it comes out in a purely negative juvenile way, than I don't know, the kind of neoliberalism that we see today.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought Heidegger into this because it's, especially towards the end, he talks about the history of being, right? And that the history of being not only is an understanding of how we understand being, but it's also that understanding also affects the ways in which we live. My favorite example, which he doesn't point to, but Heidegger scholars point to, is the Roman mode of being. That the Roman mode of being is like one of power, like, oh, to be is to be powerful, to be is to have power, which is one that Nietzsche really attaches onto very much in his own philosophy and tries to reinvigorate. And yeah, it seems like with 4chan though, right, it could, at least the way you're talking about it, it talks about a certain mode of being, a certain push of being, that our being shouldn't be predicated on sort of social formality and social unity and coherence. It should be more based upon this sense of outrage and just like don't take any of it seriously, none of it matters. Not necessarily burn down the castle, but in a sense it does seem like there's a lot more of a tearing down sense to 4chan than a sense of building up anything philosophically. Like even on the reading list boards, whenever philosophy does come up, it seems more of like people making fun of someone, like, oh, why is Hegel such an idiot? Why is John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism make no sense, right? Like maybe there's a couple of people there who like Nietzsche a bit, and I think there's some funny reasons for that. But yeah, I don't know which direction you want to go with all of that I said. If you want to go towards the direction of what sort of people on 4chan generally like and generally find themselves towards, or if you would rather focus more on the history of being sort of stuff.
Well, let's do both. I mean, I think again, 4chan is mostly young people. I mean, not all young people. I mean, I still love.
But the vast majority, like you grow out of 4chan, it seems, for most people. Like
you just get busy at some point.
Yeah, but and you spend your time on other sites, if anything. Like, oh shoot, I'm gonna hit my friend on Instagram because we're gonna do something, or oh yeah, if I'm gonna use the internet at all, I'm gonna use it for like casual downtime. And casual downtime is not 4chan because that can be an investment, to say the least, to go through trying to find the right thread that you're interested in.
Well, what I mean, I would say that the kinds of philosophy which interest people in 4chan, and I would say that like you already said yourself, this feeling of being powerful, and just as power was viewed as very attractive in ancient Rome. I mean, this philosophy of the Bronze Age pervert. I want to be a big, strong man, go around sacking cities, raping women. This is got to admit, it sounds fun if you're a teenager. And there's a lot of urges that teenagers have they can't fulfill, particularly sexual ones. So this is obviously attractive. Nietzsche is always attractive to young people, right? Because even though he was, is fundamentally the founder of deconstructing, of the tearing down of Western philosophy, the death of God and stuff. I mean, he's a amazing writer. He's fairly easy to read. You do gain insight from reading him, and it's undeniable. So of course Nietzsche is popular. Someone like Heidegger or Marx is therefore like less popular because it's more dense, less fun to read. Hegel's incredibly hard to read, infamously hard to read. So there's less interest in it. Nonetheless, I do think that part of the reason people go in these chat boards is because historically there's been a perversion of education from the traditional model where you'd have these discussions with your family, your friends about life and meaning, and literature kind of gave people that's why it's interesting. Literature gave people a road to kind of form themselves, to give themselves to give themselves this process of individuation, to become an individual, and that process has been gone. And now it's totally true. You do see like literature as a whole, as taught in schools, has become is not useful for that. Schools have become industrialized, tailorized. Literature choices are often bad. They just reflect. I mean, even they mean well. They say, "Oh, we want to fight racism." They often select terrible books that are not, that are just kind of shitty. But they want you to read it because it has some viewpoint that they want you to have. And so people naturally think, "Oh, well, school's brainwashing." So of course you go to the internet to try to find like the real stuff, and hopefully some people do. And what's interesting though is I think the historical problem with Heidegger and philosophy of technology as a whole, as a field, is that technology is never is either viewed purely negatively, cybernetics forming a control mechanism, a gestell, as late Heidegger, or it's just not talked about at all. Like you can read, let's say, late Hubert Dreyfus's book, All Things Shining, and it's like, oh, about like sports and ethics, and it's kind of fun. But guys, like we have Chat GPT, we have AI, we have the web. Dreyfus did wonderful critiques of AI. He's a leading Heidegger scholar in the 70s, but nothing really interesting has come out recently, right? Just complaints to some extent. So we need, and I think the philosophical 4chan is very interesting. Its political influence, its lack of identity, its social power, and there's probably, like, I don't really read Lacan or Marcuse or Freud even, but I mean, someone could probably write multiple dissertations on 4chan using psychoanalysis and psychology. However, I would say that what 4chan points out is the effect of technology on forming social structures, and where Heidegger works himself into a corner is Heidegger's almost like some dude on 4chan. He gets into, he's like, okay, I'm going to critique everything, just like Nietzsche. We're going to deconstruct. We're going to tear down Western metaphysics and go back to the originary ontology, which is being, which is these moods, this sorgen, the caring, and all of this whatnot. And laughter, Heidegger, everyone worries about being towards death, but laughter, the lulls, is a fundamental attunement in Heidegger. It's one which is still not, why humans laugh is not well understood, and it's fundamental to who we are. But what I would say is that the situation we have is that what 4chan, and 4chan is not going to be happy to hear this probably, what 4chan reveals is the connection between technology and being. And this is where Heidegger fails. He works himself in the corner. He wants to return to this imaginary Germanic being, which
He
of
wants to go
course,
to the Black Forest in his little hut that his
Yeah.
wife built for him.
yeah, I've been to the hut. It's not that bad, but it's not. It's like a weird like shack, basically.
Yeah.
And but ultimately, it's a reactionary move that goes nowhere. And being in time is the wrong title. The title should be time and being. That being changes over time, and who we are and how we relate to the world is fundamentally based on our technology, and our technology changes over time. And the great theorist of this is Karl Marx. Karl Marx pointed out at the birth of industrial capitalism that this technological apparatus of the factory and the commodity and production and distribution and money and the value form was going to dominate society and change how we relate to each other, and what possibilities for revolution or politics or collapse and crisis exist. And now I think we've entered another era after industrial. Most people we don't know. We don't have industrial jobs. We don't know anyone with industrial jobs anymore. Those have all been shipped overseas or replaced by robots and automation. But there's a huge amount of philosophical work in combining the insights of phenomenology, perhaps Heidegger, about what is everyday life, what is our, how do we perceive and act and understand our everyday existence, and how that's related to technology, how that's related to our mode of production. And Frederick Jameson says, that the reason why the Soviet Union itself ended in catastrophe and ended up totalitarian, just as current neoliberal capitalism with Instagram and Facebook and all this nonsense is becoming totalitarian. How this happened is that Marxism could not provide a theory of everyday life. It failed. Heidegger tries to provide a theory of everyday life, but he doesn't provide a theory of politics. He doesn't provide a theory of technology. And I think there is something in the internet, the widespread, ubiquitous internet connections that we didn't have, which is changing our ontological being fundamentally. And that is a really productive philosophical inquiry, which honestly, like, old people are not going to be able to do because they don't understand. No, they just don't understand technology.
Yeah, no.
Like, I mean, they have no idea how any of it works. They definitely haven't been to 4chan, and they don't understand cryptocurrency. They don't understand memes. They don't understand, like, there's just a whole world they're disconnected from. So of course the philosophy they do is going to be fundamentally backwards looking. And what we need young people in particular, the youth. The youth are all. Julian Assange said this once, the Stiegler in conversation. I was in the audience. He said, the youth are always the most fascinated by technology. But because the left has given up on technology, they have ultimately given up on the youth. And when you give up on the youth, then yes, you will have terrible, terrible things happen. But it's not mean. It doesn't mean it's game over. Rather than view 4chan as a purely negative site of conspiracy theories and porn and memes and all sorts of batshit crazy stuff, let's view it as a place where young people are gathering. Let's understand what's going on. And let's understand what other forms of technology could address these issues. So what is 4chan Day, or what is Discord, or what is Twitch, or what is YouTube, or what is Pump.fun, but what are the kinds of technological platforms and technologies that could enable people? So, for example, I'm mostly, I mean, I was heavily inspired by 4chan. And by Anonymous. And now I currently, I studied philosophy very deeply in both the analytic and content traditions. But now I run a software company, and we're trying to create software. It's called NIM, like anonymous, when NIM is name in ancient Greek, and non is lack of a name. And we try to create software to allow people to be anonymous on the internet, kind of like a VPN or Tor on the level of the very packets themselves. And I do realize that these kinds of technologies are powerful and dangerous, and they will be used for things that I don't agree with. But I'd rather have people have that option. I'd rather try to create new technological forms, which would then create new social forms, which aren't bound to this kind of identitarian politics and this totally administered society. And if these technologies then allow new social forms to arise, hopefully revolutionary ones, I think this is the best I can do as a technologist. So, I believe technologists should be working on anonymity technologies, privacy technologies, technologies to change society and to change social interaction, rather than just like optimizing ads for Google or Facebook, or building yet another Chat GPT clone, which I think are all pointless waste of time.
I think you really did a lot to cover 4chan in a light that certainly a CNN panel will never cover. There's a lot more discussion that could be had about the particulars. And, I definitely encourage people to read some of Harry's articles. Do you have anything you'd like to plug, recommend, that people check out in particular? Where's the easiest place to find sort of your
Yeah.
work on 4chan or just in general?
The best piece around 4chan, it's somewhat dated because it came out at the height of the kind of, I would say, the hopeful era where we thought we could change the world around Occupy Wall Street, was this piece called The Philosophy of Anonymous, Ontological Politics Without Identity and Radical Politics. And then I've written a little bit more recently about, I think it's a piece called The Philosophy of Privacy, Secrecy, and Information Organization, where we kind of look at how being anonymous and having identity and tracking people have been an effective part of the formation of nation states since the origin. And we go into cryptography in particular. And there's another piece called The Philosophy of the Adversary, which is forthcoming, I think, in Journal of Cybersecurity. It really goes into the details of how people can hide themselves and hide messages. And then I'm doing that work practically right now. If you want a VPN, it's free. NIM VPN, NYM VPN. We built it to defend people like friends of ours who we saw got fed jacketed, as they say, or doxxed after activities coming from 4chan and various other social movements. I would also suggest that people look at the work of, I don't know if he's well known in the US, he's barely known in France, Bernard Stiegler and Yuke Wee are writing really interesting works on the philosophy of technology and AI, not just as artificial intelligence, but as artificial stupidity, and the rise of stupidity in general, and what we can do about it, and different cultures and how they use technology as Yuke's main focus. So I do think there's a lot of work to be done in philosophy, and reading philosophy is something that everyone should be doing, but you have to read it not as a fantasy. Not I want to pretend to be Socrates, or I want to worship Heidegger, or this absurd Marxology. Well, what did Marx really mean here? I mean, he was drunk half the time when he was writing. Who knows what he really meant? But you should read philosophy for inspiration for you in your current social and technical context, about how you can both understand the world, and then once you understand the world, how you can change it. And that's I'm really happy this podcast exists, because honestly, most philosophy is completely ignoring the internet, which is bizarre because, there's like whatever, how many people are actually engaged in, I don't know, Wittgenstein? Virtually no one. How many people are using Chat GPT every day? How many people are communicating primarily over Discord? How many people are playing video games? And some of this work has not been, there's interesting stuff there, but I think we're just at the beginning of really understanding how these technologies are altering us and our minds. And I want to see new people write new things. One thing that Bernard Stiegler always said, and unfortunately he died during COVID in
Mm.
France, but he had this thing where he was not, and he was my main philosophical teacher or master, so to speak. Is he was not a professional philosopher. I mean, he eventually perhaps he never got a job at a university. The reason he never got a job in university is because he went to jail for robbing banks to pay for a jazz club he was owned back in the day, and so he went to jail for many years. And in while he was in jail, he used philosophy, particularly reading Plato, Husserl, Heidegger, Marx, everyone really, to kind of maintain his sanity in jail. And he said, that the essence of being a real philosopher is not a degree, it's not training. That's what's very interesting when you're talking to your friends about Discord and Twitch and whatnot. It's really being an amateur, and that the truly good philosophy comes from amateurs, from people that are just being themselves and trying to understand their world, and they're acting out. For Bernard, philosophy was a way to maintain his sanity in this period of total social isolation. And we were all now socially isolated. Even after COVID, we're all stuck in our apartments. We're all on Zoom all the time. Even if we could go outside, there's not much going on anymore. I think philosophy is an important discipline, and the more people engage with it, particularly the more amateurs, more people from outside academia, the ultimately the chances of really having a good conversation and being excited about life and orienting ourselves, I think that possibly will then open up again, and we can get out of this totally administered fascist state that we're currently in.